This lesson focuses on the skill of pronunciation and ways that you can make improvements in your band score in this particular area. What we will do in this lesson is to think about the band score descriptors, the things that IELTS uses to evaluate your level of skill in pronunciation. So one thing you should do, if you haven't done it already, is to go to the link below and take a close look at the band score descriptors. They provide a description of what each level what skills each level can do in the 4 particular areas that they grade you for IELTS speaking. In this lesson, what we're going to do is just focus on pronunciation, and I'm going to kind of interpret this chart because it can be kind of confusing to give you the most important information that will help you think about how to make improvements in your pronunciation score. Okay, but the full detailed list is there for you if you follow that link. All right, let's start with what are the key things that you need to do in order to improve your score, in order to get a high band score for pronunciation. Well, the first thing that IELTS asks, the first thing they're interested in looking for with your pronunciation is this question: how difficult is it for others to understand your speech? Okay, in other words, does pronunciation get in the way of understanding you? If it does, then you're going to have some problems. If it does not, then you're likely to score quite high in this part of your pronunciation score. So what we're looking at here, okay, the low scoring things. Now what we're considering with low scoring is not all the way down at like 1 or 2 on the band score chart. What we're thinking about is something more in the range of a level 5 here, a band score 5. So I'm considering that lower scoring. So a low score for pronunciation related to whether people can understand you, a person will generally be understandable, so it's not like people can't completely not understand you, but there are frequent mispronunciations that make your speech less clear. Okay, so a low scoring example has that. A high scoring speaker will be easy to understand, and so their accent really doesn't impact ability to understand that person. So what can you do if you're in the lower scoring range? If you have mispronunciations and other pronunciation problems that make it difficult for people to understand you? Okay, well, a couple of things. First of all, is you can go and study pronunciation kind of as a vocabulary exercise, okay? So there are 2 resources listed for you there for British English pronunciations of words. The online Cambridge English Dictionary, which I've linked below, has a feature where you can sort of hit the pronunciation button. There's sort of a speaker-looking button next to each word that you look up, and it provides a British pronunciation of that word. American pronunciations are possible in the Merriam-Webster dictionary. Okay, so another link there provided to you. And both if you pronounce words as an American would or as a British person would, you can use either pronunciation pattern and it's completely fine, and your score won't be marked down. Okay, but treat pronunciation like vocabulary, and when you learn a new word, go to these places, go to these resources to hear the word spoken, so you can practice hearing what it ought to sound like when you say it. Okay, a second thing to do is to listen to recordings of English speakers and attempt to mimic their speech exactly. That it can be extremely good practice to get recordings, okay, so for online examples of speech, even your Magoosh materials that you're working on for IELTS, listening to the native speakers and pausing and playing, repeating what they say, and you do that as well. So you play about 10 seconds of audio, then you pause and you try to copy the sound of the speaker exactly the way they said it as you repeat what they said. Okay, so that can be a fantastic exercise for training your ear and training your mouth to say things exactly like a native speaker would. Okay, number 3. There is no substitute for getting some feedback from a native English speaker. So if at all possible, if you know that pronunciation is a problem for you, it is well worth the effort and whatever you need to put into it to get a tutor or find someone who's willing to help you to give you some feedback about what things you do in your pronunciation that make you difficult to understand. Okay, a second question that they're looking for from the band descriptors, okay, so just thinking generally here, do you use pronunciation features of English, okay, or is your English speaking really affected by your first language in a number of key areas? Okay, we're going to look at what those key areas are. Okay, a lower scoring example, okay, we're thinking about a person who is in about the 5 range, band score 5 range on the speaking descriptors chart there. They have difficulty with some particular sounds or some particular features of speaking in English, okay, and those things we've listed here, we're going to look at each of them individually, but number 1, individual sounds of English, word stress, rhythm, and intonation. If these are newer terms for you, we will discuss them in detail in just a moment. Okay, a higher scoring response will be able to use these particular features in a similar way to what a native English speaker would. Okay, now again, this does not mean your speaking needs to sound exactly like a native speaker's would. That's going to be impossible for most people, okay? What it means is you're supposed to be able to show that you can, even if you have an accent from your first language, which you most likely will, that you can use some of these particular features. Okay, so what are they? Let's take a look. Okay, the first one is pretty basic, and it relates to what something we talked about earlier when I advised you to go take a look at pronunciations in those dictionaries, right? The Cambridge English Dictionary or the Webster Dictionary online. So every language has its own features. So your native language obviously has its own pronunciation features. And that means that there are going to be certain things about English that are going to be uniquely difficult for you and other people who speak your native language than there would be for people who speak other languages and they are also learning English, okay? Because the particular features of your first language affect your ability to do or pronounce certain things in English. Okay. So that means that there are going to be specific things to you and your plan for being able to reproduce the sounds of English that are going to be different from other people's, right? So it's impossible for me to give a list of things to all of you out there listening to this lesson because there's so many languages represented by students here. Okay. But so my advice to you is to do a little research. Find out the things that are particularly difficult for you and speakers of your native language. Okay, so for example, Arabic speakers down below. So Arabic speakers often have difficulty producing the P sound, okay, in English, right? The sound of P and B is not really one that's very meaningfully different in Arabic, okay? But in English, they are, okay? So if Arabic is your first language, that's something you can target, is being able to produce the P sound in English, okay? Spanish speakers, when a word begins with S, they have difficulty reproducing what we do in English, which is to simply start with the S sound, okay? So many Spanish speakers will put an extra in front of that S sound, okay? And so it's another example of a feature that might be difficult for many Spanish speakers who are learning English. German learners of English have trouble with the V sound. So that V often sounds like a W, so a W sound. Okay, these are just examples. Again, we can't go through all of these for all of the different languages represented by all of you out there listening to the videos here, but doing a little research, trying to figure out what are the difficult sounds for speakers of your native language when they're learning English can be a good place to start. So using those dictionaries that I recommended earlier, but also trying to think about words you already know well and to pronounce them more like a native English speaker would. Okay, a second category, another feature of pronunciation that can either pull your score down or pull your score up if you do it well, is word stress. Okay, now word stress relates to the words that have more than one syllable. So a short word like bat or pat has one syllable, one beat to the word, and any longer words that have more than one syllable like playground or homework, okay, those have two beats, right? Playground and homework, right? There are two beats to the word. Okay, so any word that has more than one beat, right? So two beats or more, two syllables or more, will have a predictable stress pattern. And by stress, I mean there's going to be a certain part of the word that is emphasized more than the other parts of the word. All right, and that's predictable. Now, there are some differences among the different accents of English, right? So British and American pronunciation sometimes puts word stress in different parts of the word. No matter what you're focusing on, if you're learning British or American English, that's fine for the IELTS. They won't pull your score down if you use one pattern over the other. The point is to pay attention to what native English speakers do with word stress and try to copy those features. All right, so for example, we've got some example words down below. So with these words, all right, I've underlined and put in bold there the part of the word that gets the stress. So pretend, formation, holiday, create, approximate. Okay, do you hear how those underlined parts in the way I say these words we slow them down a little bit? We emphasize them a little bit more, okay, a little bit louder with our voice on those parts. And then on the other parts of the word, we sort of speed up and we emphasize them less. That's what word stress is all about. It's putting the emphasis on that particular part of the word in the same way that a native speaker would. This, again, is a kind of thing you can study when you're learning vocabulary. Okay, so when you're learning a new word in particular, you're not quite sure how it sounds, pay attention to the word stress there and try to do it exactly the way that a native speaker would. Okay, the next category here is rhythm. So at the top here, generally speaking, English rhythm places emphasis on a key word of each phrase. Okay, so what we're talking about here, every sentence in English has a kind of rhythm. Okay, and let me sort of show you how this works when there's no rhythm to your sentence. So I've got a sample sentence down there below. So I'm going to say this sentence without any rhythm, or at least without rhythm, the kind of rhythm patterns that a native English speaker would. And I think you'll hear it sounds a little bit like a robot. Okay, so here's the sentence that you see there. I went to the store to get some food for dinner. Okay, that doesn't sound human, right? It sounds like a robot when you say each individual word with the same amount of spacing in between without doing anything to affect the rhythm of the sentence. Now, at the bottom then, if we add rhythm in the way that a native speaker would, what we do is we put a kind of beat on the most important word of every phrase, okay? And that's what native speakers do when they put their sentences together. They emphasize the key word of every phrase by putting a kind of beat on it. They slow down on that word a little bit, and they speed up on the other words in the phrase that are not as important as that key word. So here's how I would say this sentence with some rhythm added. I went to the store to get some food for dinner. Okay, I went to the store. Do you hear how I went to the is faster, and then store is emphasized. To get some food, okay, so food is emphasized, and the other words are sped up, and for dinner, right? For is very quick, and dinner is slower. That's what we do when we add rhythm to our sentences. We emphasize those key words. So, when you are listening and doing your practice, trying to mimic what native speakers do, pay attention to their rhythm. Try to get the same rhythm with your sentences as what you hear the speaker saying when you pause and play and repeat. Do that kind of practice as you try to improve your pronunciation. Okay, the last thing here, intonation. And this is related to rhythm, all right? So we have rhythm to each sentence. We can also try to incorporate the way that native speakers use intonation, okay? Intonation is basically the singing quality of your voice, how your voice goes up and your voice goes down. Okay, and in English, we use our intonation a lot to express things that we're thinking. Okay, now intonation is complicated. Okay, it's a complicated process, but it works very similarly to rhythm. So with our sample sentence again in the middle now, here's a sentence with flat intonation, right? I'm going to say it the incorrect way. So, I went to the store to get some food for dinner. Okay, so I also had bad rhythm there, obviously, too. But did you hear my voice didn't go up or my voice didn't go down? And I like my voice to go up and down. Okay, so at the bottom, I'm going to add intonation the way that I usually do. And you should listen for and hear the way my voice rises and the way my voice falls in certain parts of the sentence. And I put arrows there to show you how it's going to rise and fall. So, I went to the store to get some food for dinner. Again, a thing that you can practice, especially if you're doing the kind of focus practice where you pause and play and repeat after native speakers that you're listening to. I highly recommend that for trying to get the rhythm and the intonation of their speech down. Okay, so to review, study pronunciation with vocabulary. When you learn new words, use those dictionaries that are linked for you down below as well. The British and American versions are perfectly fine to use. And listen to the pronunciations of words. Try to mimic them the closest you can. The second one, practice mimicking the speech of native speakers. Use recordings of English. Pause, play, repeat. We mentioned it several times in this lesson, but that's a really important thing to try to do, trying to copy exactly what you hear the native speakers saying. If you have a native opportunity to speak English with native speakers regularly, do so. Okay, and to improve your band score, to reproduce those sounds of English that can be difficult, focus on these things: individual word sounds, word stress, rhythm, and intonation. Okay, so these are things to focus on as you're trying to improve your band score for pronunciation, which is one of the 4 categories they evaluate you on in the speaking interview.